Okay, so why don't we get started? Welcome to the webinar on alarm management in ISA 18.2 IEC 62682 on how to get started with an alarm management program. Just standard messages for Exida webinars. You'll be in listen-only mode. You can put questions in the questions area and we will review them at the end if we have time, answer them live or as a follow-up to the presentation. The presentation slides will be made available. There'll be a link sent out after the presentation along with also a link to the recorded video. So my name is Todd Stauffer, Director of Alarm Management here at Exida, and we are joined by a special guest. Happy to introduce Peter Caprillion, who is the Chief Technology Officer at SyTech, a company that makes a piece of software called XLReporter, which is something that we're going to look at in this seminar. So a little bit about Exida. Oops, sorry. I cut off Peter. Do you want to say something, Peter? Introduce yourself.
I just wanted to say good morning.
It could be good afternoon or good evening as well.
Good evening, yes. Good day. How's that?
There we go. So hopefully you're already familiar with Exida from having seen some of these webinars before. We're a global leader in providing services for functional safety, cybersecurity, and alarm management. We also do personnel certification and product certification for functional safety and cybersecurity. And we have a suite of tools for SIS design, including one for alarm rationalization called SyTech. And we'll talk about that a bit during this seminar. And now I'll let Peter describe himself and SyTech.
Good morning or afternoon. XLReporter has traditionally been a reporting product for industrial applications. And through a partnership through Exida, we have now added an ISA 18.2 compliant component, which is going to be part of this presentation. Some of the things that you probably would like to know about XLReporter, because what I'm about to say will also apply to the module, is that, first of all the design work for templates is entirely custom. So you can go into Microsoft Excel, use the tools that we provide to design your own template. You can put, this is where I want my alarms to go. But more importantly, if you take a look on the right, we have all the interfaces to all these other products, which means that through our traditional connectors, you can go and grab live data, historical data, analytics from those historical data. You can also go to relational databases like SQL Server, Oracle, and all this information can be auxiliary to the reports that we are going to provide that are compliant with your ISA 18.2. I did mention Excel. All the design work is done in Excel, but we've created our own standalone engine that will be able to produce reports as workbooks, as PDF files, or as web pages as a completely standalone product. So there's no additional software needed in order to produce or view reports. For those of you who are interested, we use this technology called Microsoft OpenXML. Reporting from our product is done automatically. In other words, you set up a schedule and it will go away and produce, and that's going to be important for you as we move forward because you're going to need to know information about your reporting reporting system in a timely manner, and you need to be fed that information constantly. And we can also produce reports on demand, and that's something else we'll touch on later in this presentation.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. We'll see more about that later. So continuing the structure of this presentation, then we're going to talk about the alarm management lifecycle that's described in the ISA 18.2 and IEC 62682 standards. We'll focus in particular on the portions of the life cycle that talk about performance measurement, talk about why you should measure performance, what do we judge performance against, how do we benchmark an alarm system, and we'll also look at some of the common alarm management issues that are the whole reason why we do the benchmarking and performance assessment, to view the status of the performance of the alarm system and to figure out how to make it better. And then at the end, we're going to talk about a new program that we have to actually allow you to get a free assessment report, a free benchmark report that would be produced using SyTech XLReporter technology. So with that, let's get started. So when it comes to performance measurement and assessment, what's relevant and important is both the EMUA 191 guideline, which was really the first document or practice on alarm management, and it contains a lot of best practices. It's not a true standard, but it's got a lot of good information. And it was really the first to provide some recommended metrics and KPIs. When it came time to create the ISA standard, ISA 18.2, and the IEC standard, with the research that had gone into the EMUA documents, we, for the most part, took on board those KPIs that were in EMUA, where we certainly made sure that we didn't conflict with anything, so we kept that consistent and added some new KPIs, I believe, as well. So for performance monitoring assessment, EMUA 191 is relevant, as well as the standard ISA 18.2, which is for the US, North America, and the IEC 62682, which is the international version of the standard. Both ISA 18.2 and IEC 62682 have requirements and recommendations in them for what you need to do from an alarm management point of view. Now, one of the unique things that they both define is what's called an alarm management life cycle, which you see here with the different stages, such as alarm philosophy, where you create a document or guideline for how to do alarm management at your site. We're not going to talk too much about that. We have some other webinars that you can check out that talk more about that. But you can see there's different stages of the life cycle, including rationalization, monitoring and assessment, audit. And what we're going to focus on primarily during this discussion is this monitoring and assessment stage. And that has to do with measuring alarm system performance KPIs and identifying problematic alarms or alarm issues. We're also going to touch secondarily on auditing, and we'll see how audit becomes part of the initial benchmark. So a little bit more about covering the alarm management lifecycle, and you can see again the standards. Besides creating this alarm management life cycle, we also defined the definition or what an alarm should be, and you can see that here, and we'll reference that a little bit later. An alarm is an audible and or visible means of indicating to the operator equipment malfunction, process deviation, or abnormal condition requiring a response. So part of our goal in monitoring and assessment is to evaluate whether the alarms are meeting this ideal definition. And if they are not, then we take them through a process called alarm rationalization, where we have a methodology for truly assessing whether the alarms meet this criteria or not. So in terms of supporting an alarm management program that addresses all the stages of the life cycle, this is where exida and SyTech have partnered. Exida provides products and services that can address from philosophy creation to implementation. Our SIL alarm rationalization tool can also address management of change. And we're going to talk some about auditing and initial auditing that exida can help with as well. SyTech, with their XLReporter software, completes the picture by providing capabilities to do the monitoring and assessment piece, which is part of continuous improvement, and also for the initial benchmarking piece. So it's the combination of Exida's products and services with SyTech's XLReporter that allows us to address the whole entire alarm management lifecycle. So why is it important to measure alarm system performance? Well, it's actually a requirement of both ISA 18.2 and the IEC standard. And I just want to read what those requirements truly are so you're aware of them. First, alarm system performance shall be monitored. And if you've read any standards before, you know that the word shall means that this is a requirement. So if someone was to come audit you against alarm management best practices or good engineering practices, they would expect you to be monitoring alarm system performance. They would also could evaluate to make sure that you are doing monitoring and assessment. And essentially the second requirement is that monitoring and assessment of the alarm system performance shall be made against the target performance levels in the alarm philosophy. Target performance levels means the number of alarms per day per operator, alarm flood scenarios, stale alarms. We'll look at what examples are of these performance levels coming directly from the ISA standard. And those are typically the ones that end up in an alarm philosophy either as is or maybe slightly modified. So reason to measure and analyze performance. Now let's talk a little bit about terminology to make sure it's clear what we're doing and the differences between an initial benchmarking and an ongoing monitoring and assessment. So monitoring is actually the measurement and reporting of your alarm system performance. So it's purely the measurement portion of your quantitative elements. Assessment is the actual evaluation of those measured performance metrics against the KPIs or the target metrics that you've defined. So those two obviously go together. An audit then is a comprehensive assessment that includes not only the quantitative performance assessment, but also an evaluation of the work practices that you use for alarm management, such as management of change, testing and training, things like that. Then the last term is benchmark. That's one of the things we're going to focus on here. That's a special term that means the initial audit of the alarm system. So if you're going to create a performance improvement program, you have to define your from state so that when you make things better, you can compare to where you started from. So the benchmark is actually the initial audit, which would include some quantitative performance measurements and also some assessments of work practices as well. So with that, let's move on and see how this factors into an alarm management program. So the first step really in creating an alarm management program for an existing system is to do the initial benchmarking. That's the first step. We'll look at, that's the main focus of this presentation, and we'll see that there's quantitative and qualitative elements of that. The idea is to identify systematic issues that can then be addressed when you create an alarm philosophy document, which will define the guidelines for how you do alarm management. That makes you ready to do alarm rationalization, which is the deciding which alarms are truly warranted and need to be there. Then we create alarm response procedures from the results of rationalization. We may need to do advanced alarming and alarm suppression. We implement the results of rationalization. And then we also get into a continuous improvement program or mode where we're measuring the performance. Then we're doing the monitoring and assessment probably on a monthly basis, and you'll see that. And that really creates a continuous improvement loop where we identify alarms that are not performing well as part of our monthly measurements, and then we fix or review them through the rationalization process. And then last but not least is a true audit of the work practices. And that gets done typically on an annual basis or every 2 years. So that's the program that we recommend using. It works for any control system, and we've applied it successfully with many different customers. Now, for this discussion, we're going to focus primarily on that initial benchmark and also the monitoring and assessment, the measuring performance, because there's similar technology used in those two things. So first, we'll hit the benchmark. So initial performance assessment, both quantitative, using a tool such as the SyTech XLReporter tool, which we'll see in a second. It also includes a qualitative assessment of performance, such as you might have in an operator questionnaire, and then also some auditing of the actual work practices that you use for alarm management. And as I mentioned, this benchmark establishes your initial performance threshold, as well as identifies your systematic design problems that you want to get fixed through your alarm management program and in your alarm philosophy document. So just a little bit about the auditing portion. Here's an example of the operator questionnaire. This comes from EMUA 191. We've adapted it into an exida format and can do it electronically, but this is a way to gather information on how well the system is working from the operator's point of view. We can also assess the work practices that are being followed by comparing what's happening against the true requirements of the standards, looking at each of those requirements and seeing how they are being implemented or addressed. And then last but not least, the performance assessment. And here we see the recommended KPIs or measurement areas that are highlighted in the ISA 18.2 standard and in the IEC standard as well. And you can see things like the number of alarms that the operators get, how often you're in an alarm flood scenario. There's also metrics related to nuisance alarms. And we're going to look at each of these metrics to understand why they're important next. So we'll look at some common alarm management issues. And I like to call these alarm management villains. And they include when operators get too many alarms, whether it's a steady state scenario, normal operation, or an alarm flood after an upset. Nuisance alarms are another big area that can impact the alarm system and how well the operator can make use of it. There's different types of nuisance alarms, such as chattering alarms and stale alarms, and we'll look at those in a little bit later in some detail. And then another major problem is when the alarm priority is not meaningful in helping the operator to distinguish the relative importance of a given alarm. So these villains, if you want to call it that, if they exist in your alarm system, they're really going to rob the operator of an important tool. It diminishes the capabilities of the alarm system. And if you have these problems to a great degree, perhaps almost to the point where the alarm system is not a helpful tool to the operator. So that's why we do performance monitoring and assessment to make sure that the alarm system is performing effectively so that it is a useful tool to help the operator deal with abnormal situations and respond appropriately. So as a little background, let's take a look at what makes a successful operator response. They go through a series of steps to respond to each alarm. First step is to detect the alarm. They need to see that the alarm is present. It needs to be enunciated and they need to notice it. Obviously, if there's a lot of nuisance alarms or there's a lot of flashy colors on your screen, the operator might not see or detect that the alarm exists right away, might be delayed. Second step is they need to diagnose what the problem is and kind of figure out what the appropriate corrective action should be, and then they need to take their response. So the operator goes through these three steps: detect, diagnose, and respond. We'll call that the operator response time. So the question then becomes, how many alarms, how many true alarms, an alarm that the operator actually needs to respond to, and I mean other than acknowledging the alarm or silencing the horn, how many true alarms can an operator respond to in a 10-minute period? That's what we'll use as our measurement criteria. And the EMUA and ISA standards with the human performance assessments that have gone on behind it have determined that in general, operators can't deal with more than 1 to 2 alarms every 10 minutes on average. So that will be one of the key performance indicators that we want to calculate with our XLReporter tool and see what we're actually achieving versus those metrics. Now, if an operator can effectively process 1 to 2 alarms per 10 minutes continuously, how many can they deal with in an upset or an alarm flood? And the answer there is on the order of 10 alarms in 10 minutes. And that's what's called an alarm flood, which is any time the operator really gets more alarms than they can reasonably deal with. And this can be one of the most challenging and stressful times for an operator because depending upon how many alarms they get, they are very likely not able to effectively understand and respond to each one, so they can miss alarms. And if they happen to miss the wrong alarm, you can end up with an incident or an accident. So key parts of our performance analysis is to measure how many alarms we're getting during these upset scenarios and seeing how much of the time we're in this kind of an upset. Now, nuisance alarms are another key thing to look at. Here you can see the definition of a nuisance alarm. It's any alarm that enunciates excessively unnecessarily or does not return to normal, even if the operator takes the correct response. So that's partly what's so dangerous about nuisance alarms. An operator can respond and do what they're supposed to do, and then perhaps the alarm doesn't clear or doesn't go away. In other words, their response made no difference whatsoever. And obviously, if this continues to happen, or they're noticing that there's alarms that are occurring, and if they don't respond, nothing bad happens, at some point, the operators are going to think that they can ignore alarms, and they will just use that and do that as a way to prioritize their attention. It's very much similar to the boy who cried wolf scenario or fable that's told to young children. So nuisance alarms are very dangerous because they truly can make the operators believe that it's okay to ignore alarms. So it desensitizes them to it, and it also causes a lot of stress because there's typically a lot of extra alarms occurring, making the operating environment very challenging. Now, there's a couple of different types of nuisance alarms. First one is a chattering alarm. This is an alarm that goes into alarm and then clears relatively quickly, let's say on the order of 3 times per minute. And you can imagine that if an alarm goes true and then it clears 1 second later, that didn't have anything to do with what the operator did, because they probably didn't even get a chance to acknowledge the alarm in that time. So that can be very frustrating. It can be very difficult for them to concentrate, to focus on what's going on. So that's one of the reasons why we want to eliminate chattering alarms as much as we can. And you can see the standards push to say, yeah, you should not have any chattering alarms, or if you do, you should be making plans to correct them or to fix them. Fleeting alarms are another type of nuisance alarm, very similar to a chattering alarm. It just, the only difference is they don't immediately repeat. Bad actors, and I apologize to any Arnold Schwarzenegger fans out there. Bad actors are a category of alarms where your top 10 or 20 alarms, typically you may find, if you've not done an alarm rationalization, that they contribute maybe 50 to 80% of all the alarm traffic, which means there is a handful of alarms that are causing most of the problems. So that's why it's very useful to identify those and to see what portion of the total alarm load they make up, because they become prime candidates to be fixed during the rationalization process. Another type of nuisance alarm is a stale alarm. This is an alarm that's active for more than 24 hours. These can be very challenging to fix because they could be hardware problems. They could be alarms that have the wrong set point for the mode of the process, but they are detrimental to performance because they fill up the alarm summary display and make it much harder for operators to see new alarms. And in some cases, I've been in control rooms where the whole entire alarm summary is full of stale or standing alarms, enough that you need to scroll through a couple of pages before you get to the latest alarms. The last category for evaluation is the alarm priority, and we'll look at the enunciated alarm priority. This is the distribution of alarm priority that the operator actually sees. And it's recommended that you would have just 3 or 4 different alarm priorities to make it easily understandable for the operator. But the idea is you should only have a small fraction of all your alarms to be at your highest priority. What's recommended is if you have a 3 priority system, it would be about 5% would be high, 15% would be medium, and 80% would be low. The idea being priority is really supposed to guide the operator to know when they have multiple alarms, which one is the more important one, which one do they respond to first. So priority is really important. And if you don't have the priority set correctly or some methodology that really reflects how important the alarm truly is, then it's going to give the operator bad advice. And of course, if 50% or more of all your alarms are high priority, then the operator can't really tell which alarms are most important, and thus none of them are high priority. So that's why we drive to look at those performance metrics. So those are the key things that we're going to look at in our benchmark and our ongoing monitoring and assessment, and why they're important. So now let's take a look at what some of those reports look like and the type of information that can be contained. So one of the areas of this benchmark performance report that can be created from the SyTech XLReporter technology is a overall benchmark that shows your current performance, your measured actual alarm system performance, and compares it directly versus what the recommendations are in the ISA standard. Now you could change the target to be what is specific to your alarm philosophy if you like, but as an initial starting point, if you don't know where you are or have a gut feel but not a quantitative feel to back it up, this benchmark report can do a great job there. So you can see it can do the actual calculations and tell you where you compare. So for example, the number of chattering and fleeting alarms, we said we want that to ideally be 0. And in this case, in this example, there's 132 of them. So the idea is this benchmark report can really show you where you stand and give you quantitative proof of the performance and perhaps the need to create an alarm management improvement program. So now Peter's going to talk a little bit more about what goes into that benchmark report and the information contained.
Thanks, Todd. I've been in a few systems where, you know, alarms every month can go into the hundreds of thousands. And you look at a situation like that and you say, well, where do I start? And I think the benchmark report answers that question. And what we've done is we've created a way in which you can go out and collect a sample of your reports and send it to us. Now, we've provided all the instructions on how to do that on our website, but it essentially means you're running a small program on your system to create a encrypted file that contains any range of alarms from 15 to 30 days. From there, what we will do is we'll send you a 20-page plus report at no cost. And you may wonder, well, why is SyTech doing that? Well, first of all, you need a benchmark. You need to know whether it's whether you need to justify investment in exploring improvements inside your alarm system. It also provides a basis for discussion. You know, if you have nothing, it's hard to discuss. It's difficult to get good input from an operator because they'll only give you day-to-day responses, whereas this benchmark report is going to give you some long-term view of what's been going on. It's also going to help justify any investment that you plan to make. The report itself is, like I said, 20 plus pages. It gives you information about all the ISA KPIs and how you stand against them, and that was shown on the previous slide. Then when we need to move forward, XLReporter can be used in two different ways. It can be used off-premise or on-premise. And off-premise, you can subscribe to monthly monitoring and assessment reports, which we'll see later. Or on-premise, XLReporter can be installed at your facility and will be running in a periodic manner. And the advantage of off-premise is it's very low risk. It doesn't require any change to your system except you having to run that encryption collection program on a timely basis, and we'll send you the reports. A lot of customers like that because they say, you know, why do I need to go and invest in hardware, software, IT, and all the other costs that are usually incurred in getting an on-premise? And I'm going to make that expense and only use it once a month. I don't know if I can justify that. However, on-premise customers will say, I want it on-premise because I like the fact that you can go out and capture data from my historians, my databases, my live data, and also that I can go in there and customize my reports according to my taste. Also, on-premise will allow you to start distributing information automatically as well. So both have a place, and we've packaged it such that you can pick and choose which one suits you best.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So that's the benchmark, the initial performance measurement baseline. We also mentioned that it would include some operator questionnaire and some auditing of work practices. Now let's switch gears and look at the true monitoring and assessment stage of the life cycle and other information that we might be gathering here. So Peter, you want to talk more about what XLReporter can do here?
Yeah, so now that we've gone past the assessment, Todd has gone in with his organization, provided services, or you've gone in and you've rationalized your system by yourself. The next thing that we need to start thinking about is, how do I get continuous feedback of what's going on? How can I monitor my improvements? How can I see some long-term trends of what happened over the last 6 months to see that we're heading in the right direction? That's when XLReporter is either going to be off-premise or on-premise. But whichever way you go, there are out-of-box templates in both cases, and if you install it, you can design your own. As you can see over the right, this is a template that was designed by a customer. They designed it in Microsoft Excel. They felt very comfortable doing this in Microsoft Excel. And then they used XLReporter's tools to overlay the data that they wanted showing on this particular report. The other key factor here is on-premise, you'll be able to combine it with your process data. There's nothing better than being able to see maybe some analytics like the min, max, and average of some key process values over the duration of the alarm period. You know, we have customers that are concerned about their alarms, but they're also concerned about, well, how did that affect my process? Because if it had an adverse effect on my process, then what we are producing has got to be deemed unusable. And so process data combined with alarm data is a very, very powerful statement to make. And then there's the automatic distribution. Again, this is an on-premise feature, but the automatic distribution means that you'll get more eyes on the data. People will be able to receive information in a timely manner via email or by web pages. On my next slide shows that. It shows actually, this shows one of the reports that you will receive in either on or off premise. It's a multi-tab report. The first tab is actually a reflection on the ISA targets and also the results. We've used color coding here to highlight what the state of play is. But as from a distribution point of view, this is also published as a web page, which can be viewed on a mobile device. The key thing here is that if you didn't like the look and feel of this, you can easily modify it yourself and change it to your own sort of corporate look. It's a multi-tab report, as you can see here, and you can pick and choose which tabs you want. You can remove. You can create one of these on a monthly basis and decide to save these metrics to a database so that if you are looking for long-term trending, you have all this information stored away for you to make an assessment of how the improvements are going.
So let's look at some of those other tabs and some of the other detailed information that appears. So looking at the top alarm sources, the bad actors we call it, is one of the most important things for ongoing alarm management improvement. And you can see here it's shown kind of in a Pareto chart format. Here we look at the actual statistics and identification of the worst performing alarms. We say, why is this important? Well, we may have 10,000, 20,000 alarms configured in our system, but there's going to be a handful that likely drive the majority of the activity. And in this case, we're finding that there is a single high alarm for a pressure regulator that is creating almost 8% of all the alarms. So just that one alarm out of 10,000 or whatever is creating 8% of the notifications. So obviously something probably wrong with that alarm or the design, or maybe it shouldn't even be an alarm in the first place. So the identification of what you see here becomes a great list of the alarms to look at next or immediately when it comes time for rationalization. It also shows the actual timeline of the number of alarms per day and per hour within a specific day. And this is important because you get one picture of what's happening by looking at averages, but you get a different view of what's going on by looking at the daily actual measurements. So we could have a scenario where the average number of alarms is acceptable over the reporting period, but it's not until you look deeper into the daily that you see that there's maybe many days that are quite acceptable with low alarm activity, but then there's also days with high alarm activity that may actually exceed the recommended value. So that would say that even though our average alarm rate is good, if we look at it on a daily basis, there's still areas for improvement. One of the things that we can home in if we do that and look at the daily activity and hourly activity, then we get into looking at and identifying alarm floods, which again are the scenarios where the operator is getting more alarms than they can realistically deal with. 10 alarms per 10 minutes. And here you can see some excerpts from XLReporter that show the timeline of the alarm floods, when they happen, how they compare to each other, how long they last for, and then the statistics that go with it. So we can see there were quite a few alarm floods that occurred here, and some of them lasted quite long, 170 minutes, 300 minutes, and some of them had quite a few alarms during that time period, 300 alarms in the alarm flood. So this is all very good information, and then we can look further into what alarms are actually included in that alarm flood, and then that can be something that's addressed or fixed during rationalization. We also talked about the average alarm rate, and here's some more statistics into that to see by day, again, what are the number of alarms that we're getting, and also included by priority. And then you can look at those metrics on a daily basis as well. And then one of the things that Peter mentioned is you can actually historize the KPIs as well. So if you have the average number of alarms for the month of May and then the month of June and July and August, you can now historize those and see how they trend over time. Again, to show whether you're making things better or keeping things where they are, or performance is slipping. Another key thing to look at again is the stale alarms, the alarms that are active for more than 24 hours. Those represent problem scenarios. Those are alarms that the operator is going to ignore because either his response doesn't make the alarm go away and there's no consequence occurring, or perhaps the alarm set point or limit is incorrect for the current mode. So those are alarms that definitely we want to fix or get addressed. So we've got the detailed list of those particular alarms, those stale alarms, and how long they've been in alarm. This list may also reflect alarms that are not working correctly. Maybe there's a problem with the hardware. So you could use this list to identify instruments that need to be fixed by maintenance. So that's also a good use of this information. Chattering alarms are the nuisance alarms that go in and out of alarm with a high frequency or don't stay in alarm for a long period of time. And here you can see identification of particular alarms that fall into that category, the number of times that they activate, the average time that they're active. So for example, all of these on this chart are active for an average of 1 second. So obviously that's not a very useful alarm. There's not even enough time for the operator to acknowledge that alarm, let alone take a response to correct whatever potential problem underlies that. And then there's, beyond the standard charts that we see, there's some additional enhancements and customization that can be done. Peter, do you want to jump back in and continue here?
Yeah, what's probably notable here is that we sometimes are asked, is it possible to take this information and move it to a different system? It might be the business system, or it might be a server where the engineers actually work, and the answer is yes. As I alluded to earlier, any of these KPIs can be exported to a database. In situations where the IT department doesn't like us writing directly to a database, we can produce the information as an XML or CSV, and that then can be used by the IT department to import it into their SAP system, or it may be the quality control engineer needs that information for their purposes. We've already talked about combining it with other factors like the process KPIs. One thing that's probably notable as well here is that when we produce this, the information about the alarm system, we don't replicate the alarm system in our own database. The actual number crunching is done live. And that's important to us as well. Customers didn't like the fact that, oh, so you're going to take our data out of our alarm system and put it in your alarm system. And there was a little bit of resistance by a few customers in that scenario. So we decided we'd go live all the time. So if you punch in a couple of dates, we're actually doing the number crunching at that moment in time. And finally, getting this information out so that there are more people seeing it on a daily basis. We can't just leave all these KPIs out in the control room. They have to be emailed out to people. They need to be published to web pages so that people can use their browsers. on the company network to see the information. And so more eyes on the process is as important as the KPIs themselves.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So then after we have all this data, we need to do something with it. So we're not going to leave this webinar until we talk about some of the things that you should do, the actions that you should take when you've identified alarm management issues. So hopefully part of what you're seeing is that having a tool to do alarm system performance measurement and a tool to do alarm rationalization really sets you up for effective continuous improvement. And it's the performance measurement tool that is identifying the current batch of poorly performing alarms that would potentially be the ones that would be fixed in your next rationalization session. So you can see with XLReporter identifying the poorly performing alarms, and XIDA's SIL alarm tool, we can create an effective continuous improvement process. Now, just a little bit about alarm rationalization, which is probably going to be the main method for fixing the alarm issues that you identify. The rationalization process consists of a series of steps. The first is to check whether the alarm is valid or not based on the definition of an alarm, because we might find that that alarm that's occurring 5,000 times in a month doesn't really even need to be an alarm because it doesn't have a purpose. So the rationalization process could prove that it's not needed and it could be addressed by eliminating the alarm altogether. Additionally, we look at what's the consequence if the operator doesn't respond, what are the likely causes of the alarm, what are the corrective actions that the operator should take when the alarm occurs. We estimate the amount of time that's available for the operator to respond. Those are the first things that we do during rationalization because that helps us identify alarms that don't belong. And then we continue with assigning the alarm priority based on whatever methodology is defined in the philosophy, assigning the alarm class or classification, reviewing or adjusting the alarm set point. Again, that can address performance issues like stale alarms, for example, if the alarm set point is incorrect. Modifying attributes like on delay, off delay, hysteresis, deadband. That's a key step in addressing, for sure, chattering alarms. So one of the first things to do with a chattering alarm is to look at whether deadband or on-off delay can be applied to eliminate those short time periods. And then the last step in the rationalization process is to determine whether there's any states of the process or modes of the equipment where the alarm should be suppressed or have a different alarm limit. And you can imagine that would be one way that could address some batch of stale alarms is by implementing some advanced alarming techniques. So that's the rationalization process. We can go through that whole thing in the SIL alarm tool. It guides you through that process and documents the results. Then you implement that back in your control system, and then hopefully you'll see performance improvement. And then the next month when you do your monitoring and assessment reports, hopefully you'll see the benefits of what you've done. So we're getting to the end of our webinar here today. But now the last thing that we wanted to talk about was if you don't have an alarm management program yet and you're struggling with the how do I get started, where do I get started? Well, we can help. Peter mentioned earlier that there's an opportunity to get a free benchmark assessment report, what we looked at earlier. You can see the link on the XIDA website to go and to request or to look at the information that's there. What it entails is providing some information about your application, if it's the right kind of system that we're looking to work with, then we'll send you a link to download what's called an alarm collector that would be put onto your system to gather the alarm data, and then that gets sent to the SyTech website, which will take that data and then create that report and then send that back to you. Peter, is there anything you want to add to the process for how that works?
Only that if you are going to use the file transfer utility, you will need to contact us for a passcode, or
Okay,
you'll need to send Todd an email for a passcode.
great, excellent. Okay, so certainly think about leveraging that capability if you're trying to jumpstart your alarm management program, or you want to get management support for what needs to be done. As we showed, this will clearly identify your current performance versus the targets that are in the ISA and IEC standards. So for more information on SyTech and XLReporter, some information there. And then on that note, we'll say thank you and see whether we have any questions.
Questions can also be entered in the chat window if you wish.
Yes, as well. So there's a questions window and a chat window. So here's one question for you, Peter. How fast would you get the report back once the data is submitted?
We can crunch through, and I say crunch because you may have realized there's a lot of marrying that has to be done between when an alarm occurs, when it was acknowledged, when it was activated. We get through 500,000 alarms in about, I would say about 10 seconds.
Wow, okay. So it's reasonable to expect perhaps overnight turnaround or a day turnaround for the report? Is that true?
Oh, the response of the, I thought the question was about the responsiveness of the program, of the engine itself. Yeah, in terms of getting the benchmark report, I would say within 24 hours, that would be reasonable.
Okay, excellent. It's a good question. Any other questions here? In a live system, how long would it take a user to get a report from XLReporter? So I guess that's a question about on-premise performance.
As I said, we've had customers that have of the order of 500,000 alarms in 30 days, and that was being pulled out in 10, 15 seconds.
Okay, awesome.
So with our scheduler running in the background, you would typically run it as a service, and it then could run every day if you wish, or every week, or every month. It's entirely up to you.
So then there's a question, is alarm rationalization, alarm masking, or other activities part of this package? It's a great question. They're not part of the XLReporter tool, but the XLReporter tool is an excellent input to those activities. And those activities would go on separately. They're a different stage of the life cycle. Alarm rationalization can be done with the cell alarm tool. That can also define some advanced alarming, alarm flood suppression, state-based suppression requirements as well. And I think that is it for the questions. And just one follow-up, as I mentioned earlier, the questions that we see here, we will create an email that's got the questions documented and the answers as well, both from this session, and we're conducting it again in the afternoon. So a combination of the questions and the answers in written format as a follow-up item. So on that note, I'll say thank you very much for attending, and thank you, Peter, for joining us as our guest presenter. And we hope you continue to tune in and enjoy Exida webinars, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.